Here comes Gnosis Primer number 2, Harmonic Resonance. You don't need to hear the first rant to follow along, but if you haven't listened to the Gnosis Metaprimer episode, I recommend you start there, then come back to this. If you're returning, then get ready for a wild ride that takes us from vibrating guitar strings to social coordination, religion, and jellyfish. Background music by Stretch the Songwriter. Intro music by Vopiscus. This little rant was set off by a video that briefly brought up the phenomenon of harmonic resonance, where, for example, a plucked guitar string can invoke vibration in a tuning fork or in the unplucked string of another guitar. Too much reverberation in a small space becomes distortionary. If we're considering ideas as food, when you eat too much of a good thing, it gets gross, the way too much focus on the same idea makes you sick of it and wanting to rebel, to maintain sovereignty from its influence. Or sometimes it just fades into white noise if you encounter it too frequently. If I decide to read the same collection of maxims every day, do they compound their effect on me, like overlapping sounds of the same wavelength reinforcing one another? Or do they lose their effect the way a smell disappears in a room after you've been in it for a while? There was that literary technique of estrangement where you sometimes have to liven up a cliché to have its meaning noticed in any way, changing the wording up to be somewhat jarring, even if it means employing a less efficient formulation of it. Probably somewhat of a stretch, but could this be likened to market downturns being necessary to restore value to an overinflated currency? If you have an insight on your own and then encounter it somewhere else, that definitely reinforces it, because we all doubt ourselves but don't want to. Conversely, I recall that in my rebellious youth, I'd often reject sound advice long enough to forget it, and especially to forget where it came from, so that I could later come up with it on my own, which is a very strange ego defense mechanism that trades truth for pride, enduring a period of unnecessary blunders to ignorantly, but who knows, perhaps fruitfully, maintain the momentum of self-confidence, that invincibility of youth we all mourn the loss of later in life. Also, when you neutrally encounter an idea that strikes you as sagacious, and then start to hear it in other places, that tends to lead it credence, but only up to a special insight threshold, beyond which you start to look for evidence against it, especially if you hear it said by someone for whom you lack intellectual respect, because there's allegedly no competitive advantage in common perspectives. Although, shifting gears here, we can consider a hypothetical tension in valuation between having outsider, road less traveled perspectives versus having a harmonizing alignment with society to best integrate and receive its pre-existing synergistic advantages. Several things come to mind here. On the common sense and family values side, you have homeostasis and the genetic stability of the average. Recalling the marketing study where the average of 100 faces is significantly more attractive than the average of 10 faces, and recalling the fact that the great white shark achieved such dominance that it hasn't needed to evolve, making it both a success and an evolutionary cul-de-sac. While on the deviant or heretical side, you have the genetic sports or variations, recalling terms like exotic beauty and freak of nature, with all their concomitant risks and adaptations, which were necessarily at one time the source of today's norms in the first place. Obviously, both have their place. Sound without resonance is noise, but music without dissonance is boring. Do you think the ideal balance in music is some universal ratio of what's also best in biological terms, or is best only definable subjectively according to the relative turmoil and calm of the environmental context a living thing finds itself in? Or even further subjective, not just the position of living things in general, nor even just of the species, nor even the particular culture, but perhaps all the way down to the individual level? And if so, are a person's musical preferences, in terms of this resonance-dissonance balance, reflective of his own typical versus atypical tendencies and behavior, or his present harmony-to-discord relation to the people around him, or of that graceful balance which he does not yet possess, but what his unconscious intuition calculates would be the most advantageous for him to adopt? Or are aesthetic valuations of this sort more closely related to artistic realism, in that he prefers in music a balance that appears most closely mirrored to the balance he interprets in nature? I remember reading something recently about how synergy breaks down when the necessary communication time exceeds time spent working, as in too many meetings, emails, etc. The hatred of meetings seems to run contrary to Lincoln's line, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend 4 sharpening my axe," but very much in line with Emerson's "an ounce of action is worth a ton of theory." Although, on second thought, sharpening an axe implies already knowing what the job will take, rather than debating about it. A fun tangent here is Robert Heinlein's quip about how a committee is a life form with 6 or more legs and no brain, and Emerson's insight that 2 may talk and 1 may listen, but 3 cannot take part in a conversation of the most sincere and searching sort. This takes us further into questions of connectivity, alignment, and interfacing. Is there anything inherently beneficial or detrimental to the particular structural arrangements? Or are all interactions purely dependent on the value of the information being exchanged? Or on the congruence of the informational parts being assimilated? A recent news headline said that jellyfish have now been demonstrated to have the ability to learn from past experience, despite the absence of a centralized brain. At a glance, that sounds significant, but we may do well to ask, how well do they learn? Because historically, I haven't seen jellyfish developing a whole lot of new technology. And yet, wasn't it the freer market of early America that led to so many technological advancements far beyond the dreams of a bureaucratically repressed Europe? What are the contexts in which centralization and decentralization gain and lose potency for invention? Operational effectiveness breaks down without leadership, which cannot exist without a corresponding followership, so that a desire to take the reins needs to coincide with a willingness to hand them over. The antithesis resolves in the existence of a shared goal, but on the question of who steps up, I'm reminded of Emerson for the 3rd time tonight. "Trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string." Which takes us full circle back to harmonic resonance, and might be the best place to end this rant, but also adds irony to that rebellious impulse mentioned earlier, not to break the stride of self-trust when encountering advice that resonates as true. It's like the comical paradox presented at concerts when Tool plays that loop of lyrics saying,
"Think for yourself, question authority. Think for yourself, question authority."
Over and over, hypnotically, as if brainwashing, the joke being, "I command you to disobey." So just now I felt compelled to look up the larger quote, and it happened to closely echo something I wrote earlier today, though it's not much of a shock to see similar scenery twice while still aboard the same train of thought. We'll start with Timothy Leary. Throughout human history, as our species has faced the frightening, terrorizing fact that we do not know who we are, or where we are going in this ocean of chaos, it has been the authorities, the political, the religious, the educational authorities, who attempted to comfort us by giving us order, rules, regulations, forming in our minds, their view of reality. To think for yourselves, you must question authority and learn how to be able to put yourself in a state of vulnerable open-mindedness, chaotic, confused vulnerability, to inform yourself. My parallel musing sprung out of eating a delicious breakfast and then ungraciously reflecting negatively on it, as is my first world privilege, in a short essay I wrote as a note to myself, titled, "Breakfast is the most pernicious meal of the day." Yes, I'm probably insane, but it was a good essay, so fuck off. Here's the relevant paragraph. The feeling of discontent, in general, is the reason for every breakthrough in science and engineering, whether the vehicle was necessity, boredom, ADHD, or whatever. Religions and psychiatric treatments that attempt to pacify and cure the individual of their restlessness and search for meaning and purpose deprive that individual of the possibility of achieving it by personal accomplishment, and deprive the species of cultural and technological advances. We should, chronically, feel lost and anxious somewhat. Without that sense of urgency, we cease significant risk-taking in our exploration and experimentation. Of course, I was just talking about the productive value of staying hungry in the morning. Leary was talking about taking psychedelic drugs. Further down the page listing his quotes, I read, "Monotheism centers human consciousness on hive authority. If there's only one God, then there is no choice, no option, no selection of reality. There is only submission or heresy. The word Islam means submission. The basic posture of Christianity is kneeling. Thy will be done." So again, we have that shared values and shared understanding thing contrasted against unique heretical insight, as we demonstrate with one more quote. "A confrontation with divinity, your own higher intelligence, is going to change you, and some people don't want change. They should be warned that if you come into this temple, you're going to face blazing activation of your brain. You're never going to be the same." This parallels something else in my breakfast essay regarding proactive versus reactive proclivities, but I think it's your turn to put on the conductor's hat and drive the train of thought.
Think for yourself, question authority. Think for yourself. Question authority. Think for yourself.
Hey guys, quick note before I go. I know some of these podcast topics are a little goofy, so if you like the way I think, but you really want to take advantage of the best of what my brain has to offer, look up my books on Amazon or Audible. My first book, Augmenting Willpower, is a field manual for human psychology that emphasizes personal accountability, while my second book, An Idea is Not a Product, is a guide for building routines and systems that force you to put your money where your mouth is. Both titles are available in all formats, so you can listen to the audio on the go, easily search topics by keyword in the ebook, and the paperback fits right in your pocket.